The gunshot echoed across the plains like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds into the air as Bethany Zimmerman ran for her life. Her bare feet bled from the sharp stones and thorns of the Texas wilderness, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror of being hunted. Behind her, voices shouted, and dogs barked the sounds of men determined to claim the bounty on a runaway slave. It was 1859, and freedom was just a whispered promise for someone like her. Bethany's lungs burned as she pushed through a dense thicket, her tattered dress catching on branches, the threadbare fabric ripping further. The rising sun offered little warmth against the chill of spring dawn, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she'd come so far. For 3 days she had traveled by night and hidden by day, following the North Star as the old woman at the plantation had taught her. "Find the drinking gourd," the woman had whispered. "Follow it to freedom." But now, with the bounty hunters closing in, Bethany feared she would never see that promised land. Ahead, through the trees, she spotted a small creek. Water meant life, but it also meant leaving tracks. Still, her parched throat made the decision for her. As she knelt by the water's edge, cupping the cool liquid to her lips, the sound of approaching hoofbeats froze her in place. Xavier Thompson didn't expect to find anyone at his regular watering spot, especially not a terrified woman with desperate eyes and feet caked with blood. The young cowboy had been tracking a stray calf when he came upon her, a dark-skinned beauty who looked at him as if he were the devil himself. "Don't run," he said softly, dismounting from his chestnut stallion. "I won't hurt you." Bethany's heart hammered in her chest as she sized up the tall stranger. His face was sun-bronzed and half hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat. A revolver hung at his hip, but his hands remained open, unthreatening. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're coming." The distant baying of hounds confirmed her words. Xavier's jaw set hard as understanding dawned. He'd seen the notices in town, had heard the talk at the saloon, another slave escaped from the Wilkins plantation. He glanced at the crude iron cuff still attached to one wrist, the broken chain dangling like a bitter reminder. "Get on," he said, gesturing to his horse. When she hesitated, he added, "Unless you'd rather wait for those dogs to find you." The decision took only a heartbeat. Despite her fear, Bethany allowed Xavier to help her onto his horse. His hands were calloused but gentle as he lifted her, and for a moment, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, a promise, perhaps, or simply human recognition in a world that had denied her humanity. Xavier mounted behind her, his arm wrapping securely around her waist as he urged his horse forward. "Hold tight," he murmured close to her ear, and then they were galloping across the open country, away from the voices and the dogs, toward a future neither could foresee. The small cabin appeared like a mirage on the horizon, after what seemed like hours of hard riding. It sat nestled in a grove of cottonwoods, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Xavier felt the woman in his arms trembling, though whether from fear or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. "My place," he explained as they approached. "Not much, but it's safe." When they dismounted, Bethany nearly collapsed, her legs giving way beneath her. Xavier caught her with steady hands. "I've got you," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Come on." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves stocked with provisions. Xavier guided Bethany to one of the chairs before fetching water and a clean cloth. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her wounded feet. When she nodded hesitantly, he knelt before her and began to gently clean away the dirt and blood. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and kind. "Bethany," she replied, watching him carefully. "Bethany Zimmerman. I'm Xavier Thompson." He worked in silence for a moment. "From the Wilkins place?" She stiffened at the name. "Yes." "Bad sort, Wilkins." His expression darkened. "Known for it across 3 counties. Bethany said nothing, but Xavier noticed how her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles whitening. "You don't have to worry about him anymore," Xavier said firmly as he finished bandaging her feet. "You're free here, and you're staying that way." "Why are you helping me?" Bethany asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could get a reward for turning me in." Xavier stood, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow in the lamplight. There are some things worth more than money, Miss Zimmerman. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders reached them. Xavier's expression hardened as he moved to the window, peering out through the threadbare curtains. "Stay here," he instructed, checking his revolver. "Don't make a sound." Bethany's heart raced as Xavier stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Through a crack in the window shutters, she watched as 3 men on horseback approached, rifles across their laps. She recognized one of them, Silas Wilkins, Jr., the plantation owner's son, whose cruelty was legendary among the slaves. "Thompson," Silas called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Fine evening." Xavier stood on his porch, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, the picture of casual indifference. "Wilkins, what brings you out this way?" "We're tracking a runaway," Silas explained, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Valuable property, belongs to my father. Dark girl, about so high." He gestured with his hand. "Thought you might have seen something, being out here all day." "Haven't seen anyone," Xavier replied evenly. "But I'll keep an eye out." Silas's gaze traveled past Xavier to the cabin door. "Mind if we have a look around? Dogs lost the scent near the creek, but they were heading this direction." "I do mind," Xavier said, his voice hardening. "This is my property, Wilkins. I've told you I haven't seen your runaway. That'll have to be enough." The tension in the air thickened as Silas and Xavier stared each other down. Finally, Silas spat on the ground. "You always were a stubborn bastard, Thompson. My father won't be pleased." "Your father doesn't own this land," Xavier replied. "Or me." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Keep that attitude up, and folks might start thinking you're one of them abolitionists." "Think what you want," Xavier said, his hand casually resting near his holster. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." For a moment, it seemed Silas might challenge him further, but eventually he jerked his head at his companions. "Let's go. We'll find her without his help." As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Xavier returned inside to find Bethany trembling in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. "They'll be back," she said softly. "Silas doesn't give up easily." Xavier nodded grimly. "I know, but by then, you'll be long gone." "Where would I go?" Bethany asked. "North," Xavier replied. "There's a network of people who help folks like you reach free states. I know someone who can connect you." Bethany studied his face, searching for deceit, but finding only determination. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" Xavier's expression softened. "My mother was a house slave in Virginia. She died never knowing freedom." He paused, the memory clearly painful. "No one should live in chains, Miss Zimmerman." That night, Bethany slept in Xavier's bed while he made a pallet on the floor. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, haunted by nightmares of pursuit and capture. She woke with a cry just before dawn to find Xavier already up, brewing coffee on the stove. "Bad dreams?" he asked, pouring her a cup. Bethany nodded, accepting the steaming mug. "Thank you," she said, and they both knew she meant for more than just the coffee. After a simple breakfast, Xavier brought out a trunk from beneath his bed. Inside were women's clothes, simple, practical garments. "They were my sisters," he explained, seeing Bethany's questioning look. "She moved to California with her husband last year. Left these behind, said I might find use for them someday." He smiled slightly. "Guess she was right." The clothes fit well enough, and Bethany felt human again, dressed in something whole and clean. When Xavier produced a file to remove the cuff still attached to her wrist, tears sprang to her eyes. "Careful now," he murmured, working the file with precision. "Almost there." When the iron finally fell away, Bethany rubbed the raw skin beneath it, overwhelmed by the simple freedom of both wrists unbound. "We'll leave at dusk," Xavier said, returning the file to its place. Safer to travel at night. Throughout the day, Xavier taught Bethany what she would need to know how to follow the stars. Which towns to avoid, what to say if questioned. She listened intently, memorizing every detail, her determination growing with each passing hour. "Can you ride?" he asked as the afternoon waned. "A little," she admitted. "Only when Master Wilkins wasn't watching. The stable boy taught me." Xavier nodded. "We'll go slow at first. You'll need to be comfortable on horseback for what's ahead." As dusk approached, Xavier saddled 2 horses his own, and an older mare he kept as backup. He was securing provisions when a distant rumble of hoofbeats reached their ears. "Get inside," he ordered, his hand moving to his gun. But it was too late. 6 riders crested the hill, and at their head rode Silas Wilkins Jr., alongside his father, the formidable James Wilkins, whose plantation was one of the largest in the county. "Told you he was hiding something, father," Silas called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Xavier positioned himself between Bethany and the approaching men. "Miss Zimmerman," he said quietly, "if anything happens, take my horse and ride north. Don't stop until you reach the river." "I won't leave you," she whispered back, her voice fierce despite her fear. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, dust swirling around their horses' hooves. James Wilkins, a corpulent man with cold eyes and a florid face, surveyed the scene with undisguised contempt. "So it's true," he drawled. "Xavier Thompson harboring stolen property." His gaze fixed on Bethany. "Girl, you've caused me considerable trouble." "She's not property," Xavier replied evenly. "She's a woman with a right to her freedom." James Wilkins chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "That's not for you to decide, boy. The law's clear on this matter." He turned to his companions. "Take her." 2 men moved to dismount, but Xavier's gun appeared in his hand with startling speed. "I wouldn't," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You'd shoot over a runaway?" James asked incredulously. "Think carefully, Thompson. Your father was a respected man in these parts. Don't tarnish his name for this merchandise." "My father taught me to stand for what's right," Xavier replied. "And she's not merchandise. She's free, and she's under my protection." James Wilkins' face darkened. "You're outnumbered, son. Don't be foolish." "Maybe he is," came a new voice, "but I ain't never been accused of good sense." All heads turned to see an older man emerging from the trees, a shotgun cradled in his arms. Samuel Jenkins, Xavier's nearest neighbor, a grizzled veteran of frontier wars, moved to stand beside Xavier. "Evening, James," Samuel said casually. "Seems to me you're trespassing on my friend's property." "This doesn't concern you, Jenkins," James snapped. "When 6 men ride up on one, guns drawn, that concerns any decent neighbor." Samuel spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Now, I don't know the particulars of your disagreement, but I do know this land belongs to Xavier, and he's asking you to leave." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then James Wilkins gave a curt nod to his men. "This isn't over, Thompson. That girl is my property by law, and I'll see her returned." "She's not your property," Xavier stated firmly, his gun still raised. "She's free, and she's mine to protect." As the riders slowly retreated, Bethany felt something shift inside her, a fragile hope taking root where only fear had lived before. Xavier holstered his gun, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he turned to Samuel. "Appreciate the help," he said, extending his hand. Samuel clasped it firmly. "Figured something was brewing when I saw Wilkins and his boys heading this way." His shrewd eyes moved to Bethany. "Madam," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. "We need to move quickly," Xavier said. "They'll be back with the sheriff, or worse." "I've got a place you can stay," Samuel offered. "Old Trapper's cabin up in the hills. Not comfortable, but it's hidden. Been empty since old Mackenzie passed last winter." Bethany watched this exchange with growing astonishment. Just days ago, she had been property, a thing to be bought and sold. Now, men were risking everything to help her men who owed her nothing. Within the hour, they had gathered what supplies they could and were riding into the gathering darkness, Samuel leading the way through paths only locals would know. The old man rode ahead, occasionally stopping to listen for pursuers, while Xavier kept close to Bethany, offering quiet guidance when her inexperience with riding showed. "Why did you say that?" she asked as they navigated a particularly steep path. "Say what?" Xavier replied, distracted by scanning their surroundings. "That I was yours," Bethany clarified. "To Wilkins." Xavier's expression sobered. "I shouldn't have put it that way," he said after a moment. "No person should belong to another. I meant only that you were under my protection." Bethany studied his profile in the moonlight. "I didn't mind," she said softly. Their eyes met briefly before Samuel called back a warning, about a treacherous stretch ahead. By the time they reached the trapper's cabin, the moon was high, casting silver light across the wooded hillside. The small structure was crude but solid, with thick walls of stacked logs and a stone fireplace. "It ain't much," Samuel said as they dismounted, "but it's far from the usual paths. Food in the cache under the floorboards. Should last a week if you're careful." He turned to Xavier. "What's your plan, son?" Xavier helped Bethany down from her horse before answering. "Get her north. I've got contacts in Kansas who can help." Samuel nodded. "Dangerous journey. Wilkins won't let this go easily. Man's pride is wounded." "We'll manage," Xavier replied, with more confidence than he felt. After Samuel departed with a promise to send word if he learned anything useful, Xavier and Bethany settled into the cabin. It was sparsely furnished, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot in the corner. "You should rest," Xavier said, arranging his bedroll on the floor. "We've got a long journey ahead." Bethany sat on the edge of the cot, her fingers tracing the rough woolen blanket. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked again. "You could be killed or imprisoned." Xavier paused, considering his answer carefully. "Some things a man can't walk away from and still respect himself come morning," he finally said. "This is one of those things." "But you don't know me," she persisted. "I know enough," he replied, his gaze steady. "I know you're brave enough to run toward freedom with nothing but hope. I know you've survived things that would break most people, and I know that helping you is the right thing to do." Bethany's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Where I come from, people don't help without expecting something in return." Xavier's expression softened. "Then you've been in the wrong places with the wrong people." He moved to stoke the small fire in the hearth. "Get some sleep, Bethany. Tomorrow we plan our route north." But sleep eluded Bethany as she lay in the darkness, listening to Xavier's steady breathing from his place on the floor. Her mind raced with memories of the plantation, of the scars on her back, of faces she would never see again. And beneath it all, a question she couldn't answer. What would freedom truly mean? Dawn brought a soft rain that pattered against the cabin roof. Xavier was already up, making coffee and studying a worn map spread across the table when Bethany awoke. "Morning," he said, pushing a steaming cup toward her as she joined him. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," she admitted, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. It was only half a lie. Xavier traced a route on the map with his finger. "We'll follow this ridge north for 2 days, then cut west to avoid the settlements around Fort Gibson. From there, we can connect with friends in Kansas." "How far is it?" Bethany asked, studying the map with interest. 2 weeks, maybe more, depending on weather and—" he hesitated. "Complications?" Bethany understood what remained unspoken. Bounty hunters, slave catchers, men who made their living returning people like her to bondage. "I can ride well enough," she said with determination, "and I'm stronger than I look." Xavier's mouth curved in a slight smile. "I don't doubt that for a second." They spent the day preparing checking supplies, planning alternate routes, and discussing what to do if they were separated. Xavier taught Bethany how to use a small Derringer pistol, placing it in her hands with solemn instructions. "Last resort only," he emphasized, "but if it comes to it, don't hesitate." The weight of the weapon felt foreign in her hands, but Bethany nodded, tucking it into the pocket of her borrowed dress. As evening approached, Xavier grew increasingly restless, checking and rechecking their gear. Finally, Bethany laid a hand on his arm. "What's troubling you?" she asked. Xavier sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Samuel should have been back by now with news. No sooner had the words left his mouth than the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Xavier moved swiftly to the window, his expression tightening. "It's not Samuel," he said grimly, reaching for his rifle. "Get your things, quickly." Bethany grabbed their small pack of provisions while Xavier doused the fire. Through the window, she glimpsed riders approaching, 4 men, moving with purpose. "The back," Xavier whispered, guiding her toward a narrow door half hidden behind a storage shelf. "There's a path that leads up the ridge. Follow it until you reach the split oak. I'll be right behind you." "Xavier." "Go," he insisted, pressing the reins of his horse into her hands. "I'll hold them off and follow. If I'm not there by nightfall, keep going north. Remember what I taught you? Heart pounding, Bethany slipped out the back door and led the horse up the steep path. Below, she heard men shouting, then the crack of a rifle shot. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but Xavier's instructions echoed in her mind. She mounted the horse with difficulty and urged it forward, tears blurring her vision as more shots rang out behind her. The path wound treacherously up the wooded hillside. Bethany clung to the horse's mane, ducking beneath low-hanging branches, her body tense with fear, not for herself, but for the man who had risked everything for her freedom. When she reached the split oak Xavier had described, she reined in, listening intently. The gunfire had stopped. The forest was eerily quiet except for the soft patter of rain on leaves. She waited, minutes stretching painfully, until the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her reach for the derringer. Relief flooded through her when Xavier appeared, his face grim but unharmed, his horse breathing hard from the steep climb. "Bounty hunters," he explained tersely. "Not Wilkins's men. Professionals. They'll circle back once they realize we've fled." "You're hurt," Bethany observed, noticing the dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Xavier glanced at his arm dismissively. "Just a graze. We need to move while we have daylight." They rode hard for hours, following game trails and shallow stream beds to obscure their tracks. The rain became their ally, washing away any trace of their passing. By nightfall, they had put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers, but Xavier insisted they continue until they found adequate shelter. "There," he said finally, pointing to a rocky outcropping that formed a shallow cave. "We can rest there for a few hours." Inside the crude shelter, Bethany insisted on examining Xavier's wound. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, but the cut was deep enough to need attention. She tore strips from her petticoat to create a bandage. "You've done this before," Xavier observed, as her nimble fingers cleaned and bound the wound. "Too many times," Bethany replied quietly. "On the plantation, we had to care for each other. There was no doctor for slaves." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Tell me about it," he said softly. "If you want to." For a long moment, Bethany was silent, her hand stilling on his arm. Then, as if a dam had broken, words began to pour out stories of the plantation, of families separated by sale, of whippings and humiliation, of small acts of defiance that kept hope alive. She spoke of the old woman who had taught her to read in secret, using the Bible as their text, and of the young man who had been killed for attempting escape the year before. "That's when I knew I had to try," she said, her voice barely audible over the soft fall of rain outside. "I couldn't die there, not without having known freedom, even if just for a moment." Xavier listened without interrupting, his expression grave. When she finally fell silent, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "You'll know more than a moment of freedom," he promised. "You'll know a lifetime of it." Bethany looked down at their joined hands, his bronze by the sun, hers darker still, both marked by hard work and hardship. "If we make it," she whispered. "We will," Xavier assured her, with a certainty that she found herself believing, despite everything. They slept in shifts that night, one always keeping watch while the other rested. When dawn broke, clear and bright after the rain, they continued their journey northward, staying off the main trails and traveling through the most difficult terrain to discourage pursuit. Days blended together as they made their way across the territory. They developed a rhythm, riding by day, making camp at dusk in whatever secluded spot they could find. Xavier proved to be a skilled hunter, providing fresh meat when their supplies ran low. Bethany revealed her own knowledge of wild plants, identifying which were edible or medicinal. As they traveled, the initial wariness between them gradually dissolved. They shared stories of their lives, Xavier speaking of his father, a former trapper who had settled in the territory after falling in love with Xavier's mother, a house slave he had helped escape. Bethany told him of her childhood dreams, of the stories the elders had passed down about Africa, a place so distant it seemed mythical. "My grandmother was taken from there as a girl," she explained one evening as they sat beside a small fire. "She remembered the ocean crossing, said she was the daughter of a chief, but no one believed her." "I believe her," Xavier said simply, and Bethany felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. On the 10th day of their journey, disaster struck. They were crossing a shallow ford when Xavier's horse suddenly reared, throwing him into the rushing water. His head struck a rock, and for a terrifying moment, he disappeared beneath the surface. Bethany reacted instantly, dismounting and wading into the frigid water. She found him face down and unmoving, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. With strength born of desperation, she dragged him to the shore and checked for breath, relief washing over her when she found it. "Xavier," she called, patting his face gently. "Wake up. Please wake up." His eyelids fluttered, then opened, confusion clouding his gaze. "What happened?" "Your horse threw you," she explained, helping him sit up. "You hit your head." Xavier winced, touching the wound. "Not my finest moment," he muttered. It soon became apparent that the injury was more serious than it first appeared. Xavier struggled to stand, his balance unsteady, his vision blurring. Riding was out of the question. "We need shelter," Bethany decided, surveying their surroundings. "Can you walk if I help you?" With Bethany supporting much of his weight, Xavier managed to travel a short distance up from the river to a small clearing sheltered by pines. There, Bethany made camp with an efficiency born of necessity, setting up their meager shelter and building a fire while Xavier drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the night, she tended to him, using the herbal knowledge passed down through generations to create poultices for his wound. She bathed his face with cool water when fever set in, whispering encouragement and prayers as his temperature rose alarmingly. "Don't you dare die," she murmured, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "Not after everything we've been through." In his delirium, Xavier spoke of things she couldn't follow, childhood memories, fragments of conversations, fears about what lay ahead. Once he grasped her hand tightly and said with perfect clarity, "I think I'm falling in love with you, Bethany Zimmerman." Her heart stuttered at the words, but she dismissed them as fever talk, focusing instead on bringing his temperature down. By morning, the crisis had passed. Xavier woke weak but lucid, his eyes finding hers immediately. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. Bethany shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "You'd have done the same." "Yes," he agreed, "but I wouldn't have done it half as well." His gaze held hers. "Thank you." They were forced to remain in place for 2 days while Xavier regained his strength. It was a dangerous delay, but they had little choice. Bethany used the time to replenish their supplies, hunting small game with Xavier's rifle and gathering edible plants. On the evening of the second day, Xavier was well enough to sit by the fire and help prepare their meal. As they ate, he studied her across the flames, his expression thoughtful. "What did I say?" he asked suddenly. "When I was fevered, I remember talking, but not the words." Bethany's cheeks warmed, and she looked away. "Nothing of consequence." Xavier reached across the fire to touch her hand. "Bethany," he said softly, "please." She met his gaze then, her heart pounding. "You said—" She hesitated. "You said you thought you were falling in love with me." Xavier didn't look away or dismiss the words as meaningless ramblings. Instead, his fingers tightened around hers. "Well," he said finally, "seems fever makes an honest man of me." The world seemed to still around them, the crackling fire and singing night insects fading into background noise. Bethany hardly dared breathe. "I know the timing is terrible," Xavier continued, his voice low and sincere. "I know you're running for your life, and I have no right to complicate things. But I need you to know it wasn't just fever talking." "Xavier," Bethany began, but he shook his head. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know the truth." Bethany looked down at their joined hands, at the calloused fingers wrapped around hers with such gentleness. "The truth," she repeated softly, "is that I've never met anyone like you. Someone who sees me as a person, not property. Someone who would risk everything for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Xavier said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Xavier leaned across the small space between them. When his lips met hers, Bethany felt something inside her unfurl a bud opening toward the sun after too long in darkness. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, and when it ended, she found herself following him as he pulled back, seeking the warmth of his touch. "We should rest," Xavier said reluctantly, his voice rougher than before. "We've got a long ride tomorrow." That night, as they lay in their separate bedrolls beneath a canopy of stars, Bethany's mind raced with new possibilities. For so long, survival had been her only goal, freedom her only dream. Now, something else stirred within her, something that felt dangerously like hope for more than just escape. They resumed their journey at dawn, pushing northward with renewed urgency. Xavier had recovered enough to ride, though Bethany insisted on checking his wound frequently. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the border of Indian territory, and Xavier explained they would soon reach the homestead of a Cherokee family who were part of the underground network helping escaped slaves. "Nathan and Sarah Blackfeather," he explained. "Good people. Nathan fought alongside my father in the Creek War. Their place is just beyond that ridge." As they crested the hill, however, Xavier reined in sharply, his expression darkening. In the valley below, where a small farmhouse should have stood, they saw only charred ruins and scattered debris. "No!" Xavier breathed, spurring his horse forward despite Bethany's cry of warning. They approached cautiously, weapons ready, but the destruction was clearly days old. The house had been burned to its foundations, the barn a skeleton of blackened timbers, the fields trampled. "Raiders?" Xavier said grimly as they surveyed the devastation. "Been happening more often lately? Tensions between settlers and the Cherokee Nation." "The family?" Bethany asked, dreading the answer. Xavier shook his head. "No bodies. Maybe they escaped." But his voice lacked conviction. The loss of their planned sanctuary was a severe blow. Their supplies were dwindling, and without the Blackfeathers' help, they faced an uncertain path forward. Xavier studied his map with growing concern. "The next safe house is 50 miles north," he explained, "in Kansas territory. It's a long stretch without friendly faces." "Then we keep going," Bethany said firmly. "We've come too far to turn back now." They salvaged what they could from the ruined homestead, some preserved food from a root cellar the raiders had overlooked, a few tools, and most precious, a hidden cache of ammunition Xavier discovered beneath a loose stone in the chimney. As they prepared to continue their journey, Bethany noticed Xavier's increasing unease, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon. "What is it?" she asked as they mounted their horses. "Something doesn't feel right," he admitted. "Raiders don't usually burn a place and leave supplies behind." They had ridden barely half a mile when his suspicions were confirmed. Ahead, blocking the narrow trail, stood 6 mounted men, and at their center, his florid face triumphant beneath his wide-brimmed hat, was James Wilkins. "Well, well," Wilkins called as they reined in. "Look who we found, boys, the thief and my runaway." Xavier moved his horse slightly in front of Bethany's, his hand drifting toward his holster. "This is Cherokee land, Wilkins. You've got no authority here." "Authority?" Wilkins laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "I got 5 armed men and a legal claim to that girl. That's all the authority I need." His gaze shifted to Bethany. "You've led us quite a chase, girl. Cost me time and money." "She's not your property," Xavier stated, his voice steady despite the odds against them. "She's free and under my protection." "Protection?" Wilkins scoffed. "Look around you, boy. You can't protect yourself, let alone my property." He nodded to his men. "Take them both. The girl goes back in chains, and Thompson faces a judge for theft." As Wilkins' men began to close in, a series of sharp cracks echoed through the trees. One of the bounty hunters cried out, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his saddle. "That's far enough," called a commanding voice from the woods. Nathan Blackfeather stepped into view, rifle raised, his weathered face set in grim lines. Behind him emerged 4 more Cherokee warriors, all armed and facing Wilkins's party with unwavering determination. "You're trespassing on Cherokee land," Nathan stated, his aim steady, "and interfering with travelers under my protection." Wilkins's face darkened with rage. "This doesn't concern you or your people, Blackfeather. The girl is my legal property." No human being is property here, Nathan replied evenly. These are sovereign Cherokee lands, not your plantation, Wilkins. He gestured with his rifle barrel. Now, turn around and ride out while you still can. For a tense moment, it seemed Wilkins might order his men to fight. Then, assessing the determination in the Cherokee warrior's eyes, he spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he snarled. "There's no place you can hide her that I won't find." "Perhaps," Nathan acknowledged, "but today you leave empty-handed." With a final venomous glare, Wilkins wheeled his horse around, his men following reluctantly. They disappeared over the ridge, the sound of their retreat fading into the distance. Only when they were gone did Xavier relax his grip on his revolver. "Nathan," he breathed. "We thought you were dead. The farm—" "A diversion," Nathan explained, lowering his rifle. "We got word Wilkins was coming with bounty hunters, burned it ourselves and went to ground." His dark eyes moved to Bethany. "You must be the cause of all this trouble." Despite his gruff tone, there was kindness in his gaze. Bethany straightened in her saddle. "I'm sorry about your home." Nathan shrugged. "Buildings can be rebuilt. Freedom, once lost, is harder to regain." He turned to his companions. "Make sure they're really gone. Then we head for the caves." The caves proved to be a hidden encampment in a network of shallow caverns tucked into a hillside several miles away. There, Xavier and Bethany found not only the Blackfeather family, but a small community of diverse refugees, escaped slaves, displaced Cherokee families, and a few white settlers who had chosen to live among the tribe rather than participate in their removal. Sarah Blackfeather, a small, strong woman with intelligent eyes, welcomed them warmly. "We've been expecting you," she told Xavier, "though you're later than we hoped." "We had some trouble on the road," Xavier explained, recounting their journey thus far. As night fell, the small community gathered around several fires, sharing food and stories. Bethany watched in wonder as children of different races played together without hesitation, as elders of different traditions exchanged wisdom, as people who might have been enemies elsewhere broke bread as friends. "It's like another world," she whispered to Xavier as they sat side by side, watching the gathering. "It's what the world could be," he replied, his shoulder warm against hers, "if people chose differently." Later, as they prepared for sleep in a small alcove Sarah had shown them to, Xavier caught Bethany's hand. "Tomorrow we need to decide," he said quietly. "Nathan says Wilkins has men watching all the usual routes north. It won't be easy getting through." "We've come this far," Bethany replied with determination. "I'm not turning back now." Xavier's expression grew serious. "There's another option. Nathan's offered us sanctuary here. We could stay, at least until things settle down." Bethany considered this unexpected possibility. "Stay here? For how long?" "As long as we need," Xavier said. "Maybe permanently." The unspoken question hung between them, charged with meaning. Bethany studied his face in the dim light, seeing the hope he tried to conceal. "What about your ranch?" she asked softly. "Your life there?" Xavier shrugged. "It was never much of a life, just surviving really, working the land, keeping to myself." His fingers tightened around hers. "I never knew what I was missing until you came along." "And what was that?" Bethany asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Purpose," he said simply. "Someone worth fighting for. Someone worth building a future with." The weight of his words settled around her like a cherished blanket. "Are you asking me to stay with you, Xavier Thompson?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it," he replied, his usual confidence giving way to vulnerability. "Once you're truly free, once you have real choices, if one of those choices could be us together." Bethany reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I've never had choices before," she said thoughtfully. "It's a strange feeling, frightening and wonderful all at once." "You don't have to decide anything now," Xavier assured her. "We still have a long road ahead." Bethany smiled softly. "Yes, we do, but I'm beginning to think the journey matters as much as the destination." Their time with the hidden community stretched into days as Nathan's scouts reported increased patrols along the border. Wilkins, it seemed, had convinced local authorities that Xavier had stolen not only a slave but valuable property from his plantation. Wanted notices with both their descriptions had appeared in settlements throughout the territory. During this enforced delay, Bethany found herself flourishing in unexpected ways. Sarah Blackfeather taught her Cherokee healing practices to complement the knowledge she already possessed. An elderly escaped slave named Moses showed her how to navigate by the stars with greater precision than she had known before. She learned to shoot with increasing accuracy under Xavier's patient guidance. Most precious of all, she found moments of quiet joy with Xavier walking together at sunset, talking late into the night by the dying embers of the fire, sharing dreams neither had dared voice before. Their connection deepened with each passing day, built on mutual respect and growing affection. One evening, as they sat on a rocky outcropping, watching the sky turn from gold to purple with the setting sun, Xavier took her hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "about what happens when we reach Kansas." Bethany waited, sensing his hesitation. "Most folks heading north continue to Canada," he continued. "It's safer there. No fugitive slave law." "Is that what you think I should do?" Bethany asked, studying his profile. Xavier turned to face her fully. "I think you should go wherever offers you the best chance at the life you want." He paused. "I just hope there might be room in that life for me." Bethany's heart swelled with emotion. "Xavier Thompson," she said softly, "are you asking to court me properly?" A smile crept across his face. "I reckon I am, though I'm making a mess of it." He took both her hands in his. "Bethany Zimmerman, when we reach safety wherever that may be, would you allow me the honor of courting you as you deserve to be courted? Not as a man who helped you escape, but as a man who admires your courage, your intelligence, and your strength." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. "Yes, I would like that very much." Their lips met in a kiss that held promise of freedom, of choice, of a future neither had dared imagine before. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They broke apart to find Nathan Blackfeather regarding them with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Sorry to intrude," he said, "but we've got news. A group is heading north tomorrow, a mixed party of Cherokee and freedmen bound for Kansas. If you're going, this is your chance." Xavier and Bethany exchanged a look, charged with meaning. "We're ready," Xavier answered for them both. The journey north resumed before dawn the next day. Their party consisted of 15 people, 3 Cherokee families displaced by increasing settler encroachment, 4 escaped slaves besides Bethany and Xavier. They traveled in wagons concealed beneath loads of trade goods, following routes known only to Cherokee scouts who guided them through the rugged terrain. Progress was slow and cautious. They moved primarily at night, hiding during daylight hours in wooded ravines or abandoned homesteads. Twice they narrowly avoided patrols of armed men Xavier recognized as Wilkins' bounty hunters. The border crossing into Kansas territory marked a significant milestone. As they forded a shallow river in the pre-dawn darkness, Xavier reached for Bethany's hand. "Kansas," he said quietly, "a free territory. No one can legally claim you here." Bethany took a deep breath, tears springing to her eyes as she realized the significance. "Free," she whispered, testing the word on her tongue. But their journey was far from over. The fugitive slave law meant that even in free territories, slave catchers could legally seize escaped slaves and return them to their owners. True safety still lay further north. Their party continued to a small settlement where abolitionists maintained a station on the Underground Railroad. There, in a simple farmhouse surrounded by fields of wheat, they found temporary sanctuary. The couple who owned the farm, Elijah and Ruth Bennett, welcomed them with open arms. "You'll stay until we can arrange the next leg of your journey," Ruth explained as she showed them to a small room in the attic. "Usually a week or 2. We need to be sure it's safe before we move anyone on." Those 2 weeks became a time of healing and planning. Xavier and Bethany spent long hours discussing their future, weighing options neither had considered before. "We could go to Canada," Xavier suggested one afternoon as they walked among the wheat fields. "Start fresh where no one knows us." Or California, Bethany countered. You mentioned your sister is there. Or we could stay here in Kansas, Xavier said thoughtfully. It's risky while the territory's still divided over slavery, but there are communities of free blacks establishing themselves. We could be part of building something. Bethany stopped walking, turning to face him. When you say we, do you mean it? Truly? Xavier took her hands in his. I mean it with everything I am. Wherever you go, Bethany Zimmerman, I want to be by your side if you'll have me. As what? She asked softly. A protector? A friend? As whatever you'll allow, he replied earnestly. Though I hope, eventually, as a husband. The word hung between them, momentous and transformative. Bethany's heart raced at the implications. You want to marry me? She whispered. More than I've ever wanted anything, Xavier confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. Not today or tomorrow, when you're ready, when you've had time to know your own mind as a free woman. But yes, Bethany, that's what I want a life with you, building something that's ours together. Bethany reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines etched by sun and wind. I've never dared dream so far ahead, she admitted. Freedom was always the horizon of my hopes. And now? Xavier asked, covering her hand with his. Now, she said slowly, I find myself dreaming of things beyond freedom. A home, work that matters, children perhaps. Her voice softened. Love. Those dreams can be real, Xavier promised. We can make them real together. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They turned to see Ruth Bennett riding toward them, her face grave. Xavier, Bethany, come quickly, she called. Slave catchers in town, asking questions. We need to get you hidden. The peaceful interlude shattered like glass. Within hours, they were secreted in a false compartment beneath the Bennett's barn floor, listening to the muffled sounds of men searching above. Beside them huddled two other escaped slaves who had arrived the previous day, a mother and her teenage son. They've been tracking us since Missouri, the woman whispered, her arms tight around her son. Said my master offered $500 for our return. They won't find us here, Bethany assured her, though her own heart pounded with fear. The Bennetts know what they're doing. Hours passed in cramped darkness before Elijah. Bennett finally opened the trap door, his face haggard with relief. They're gone, he reported, but they've said they'll be back with more men tomorrow. We need to move you tonight. The hasty departure was organized with practiced efficiency. By midnight, Xavier and Bethany, along with the mother and son, were loaded into a wagon with a false bottom, covered with sacks of grain. Their destination was a Quaker settlement 50 miles north, where arrangements would be made for the final leg to Canada. The journey was tense, every creaking board and distant hoofbeat a potential threat. Xavier held Bethany's hand in the darkness of their hiding place, his thumb tracing reassuring patterns across her knuckles. We'll make it, he whispered when her grip tightened at the sound of riders passing. We've come too far to fail now. Dawn was breaking when disaster struck. A military patrol stopped their wagon, demanding to see papers and cargo. When the search began to grow more thorough, their Quaker driver made a desperate decision, slapping the reins and attempting to flee. Shots rang out, the wagon lurched violently, and suddenly they were crashing into a roadside ditch. In the chaos that followed, Xavier pulled Bethany from the overturned wagon. Run, he shouted, pushing her toward the nearby woods. I'll hold them off. Not without you, she cried, but Xavier was already turning back, drawing his revolver as soldiers approached. The mother and son had already disappeared into the trees. With a final anguished look at Xavier, Bethany followed, her heart tearing in two as she heard gunshots behind her. She ran blindly through the forest, tears streaming down her face, until a hand suddenly closed around her arm. She nearly screamed before recognizing the Quaker woman who had been riding ahead as a scout. This way, the woman whispered urgently. Quickly! They moved deeper into the woods, eventually reaching a small creek where the mother and son waited, terror evident in their eyes. What about the others? The mother asked. The driver? The man with the gun? The Quaker woman's face was grave. Thomas was shot. The young man was fighting when I left. She turned to Bethany. I'm sorry. We must keep moving. No, Bethany said firmly. I won't leave without knowing what happened to Xavier. Child, it's too dangerous. He risked everything for me, Bethany interrupted. I won't abandon him now. After tense negotiation, a compromise was reached. The others would continue to the Quaker settlement, while Bethany and the scout returned to observe from a safe distance. As they crept back toward the road, Bethany's heart pounded with dread at what they might find. The scene that greeted them was puzzling. The wagon remained overturned, but the area was deserted. No soldiers, no bodies, no sign of conflict except scattered cargo and a few bloodstains on the ground. They've taken them, the Quaker woman whispered. Likely to the fort for questioning. Or to the nearest town to collect bounties, Bethany added grimly. The nearest settlement was a small trading post 10 miles east, a logical place for soldiers to take prisoners. With determination born of desperation, Bethany convinced the reluctant Quaker woman to accompany her there. They traveled cautiously, avoiding the main road, reaching the outskirts of the settlement by late afternoon. From a wooded hill, they observed the cluster of buildings below, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a small jailhouse. There, the Quaker woman murmured, pointing to a group of horses tethered outside the jail. Military mounts. Bethany's heart sank as she recognized Xavier's horse among them. He's in there, she whispered. I need to get closer. It's too dangerous, the woman protested. If they catch you, they won't, Bethany interrupted. But I need your help. As dusk fell, they implemented a desperate plan. The Quaker woman entered the saloon, creating a distraction by loudly proclaiming herself a temperance advocate come to save the souls of the drinkers. While the commotion drew curious onlookers, including the jail guard, Bethany slipped around to the back of the jailhouse. A small barred window offered a view inside. Xavier sat on a bench in one of 2 cells, his head bowed, a bandage wrapped around his arm. In the adjacent cell, the Quaker driver lay on a cot, his shoulder heavily bandaged. Bethany tapped gently on the window. Xavier's head jerked up, his eyes widening as he spotted her. What are you doing here? He hissed, rushing to the window. You need to go. Not without you, Bethany replied fiercely. Are you badly hurt? Just a graze, he assured her. But Bethany, they know who I am. They've sent for Wilkins. He'll be here by tomorrow. Then we have until tomorrow, she said with determined calm. Tell me everything you know about this place. Through whispered conversation, they formulated a plan. The jail was minimally guarded, 1 deputy during the day, a single night watchman after dark. The keys hung on a hook behind the main desk. The military patrol that had captured them had continued north, leaving only 2 soldiers to await Wilkins' arrival. It's too risky, Xavier argued. Even if you get us out, they'll hunt us harder than ever. Let them, Bethany replied, her voice steady. I won't let Wilkins take either of us again. As full darkness fell, Bethany rejoined the Quaker woman, who had managed to learn valuable information during her performance at the saloon. The night watchman was known for his fondness for whiskey, often drinking himself to sleep during his shift. The 2 soldiers were staying at the town's only boarding house. Their plan was simple but dangerous. The Quaker woman would deliver a bottle of drugged whiskey to the night watchman. A peace offering for the disturbance I caused earlier, she would explain. Once he was incapacitated, Bethany would retrieve the keys and free Xavier and the driver. The first part of the plan worked flawlessly. By midnight, the night watchman was snoring at his desk, the spiked whiskey half consumed beside him. Bethany slipped inside, heart pounding as she carefully lifted the ring of keys from its hook. Xavier, she whispered as she approached his cell. It's time. His face, illuminated by moonlight through the window, showed both relief and concern. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever known, he murmured as she unlocked his door. You're welcome, she replied with a hint of a smile. The driver was weak but able to walk with support. They slipped out the back door of the jailhouse into the quiet night. The Quaker woman waited with 3 horses, Xavier's own mount and 2 others she had somehow acquired. Don't ask, she said when Xavier raised an eyebrow. Let's just say they belong to men who won't miss them until morning. They rode hard through the night, avoiding roads, following streams to mask their trail. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, reaching a small farmstead the Quaker woman identified as another station on the Underground Railroad. The farmer and his wife took in the exhausted fugitives without question, hiding them in a root cellar until arrangements could be made for the next leg of their journey. Xavier's wound was cleaned and rebandaged, the driver given medicine for his more serious injury. Alone briefly in the small cellar, Xavier pulled Bethany into his arms. "You could have been captured," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Or worse." "I could say the same to you," she countered, pressing her face against his chest, listening to the reassuring beat of his heart. "I won't leave you behind, Xavier. Not ever." He tightened his embrace, his cheek resting against her hair. "I don't deserve you, Bethany Zimmerman." "Yes, you do," she replied simply. "We deserve each other, and we deserve a chance at the life we've talked about." The following days passed in a blur of movement, changing locations frequently, traveling by night, always pushing northward. News reached them that Wilkins had indeed arrived at the trading post. His rage at finding his quarry escaped, once again, manifesting in a substantial bounty for their capture. $10,000, their current host reported grimly. "That's enough to tempt even decent folks." "Then we need to leave the territory entirely," Xavier decided. "Canada is our only option now." 2 weeks later, after a harrowing journey that tested their endurance and resolve, they reached the shores of Lake Erie. Across its dark waters lay Canada and true freedom. "One more crossing?" Xavier murmured as they stood on the shoreline at dusk, watching a small fishing boat approach. "By this time tomorrow, you'll be beyond Wilkins' reach forever." Bethany gripped his hand tightly. "We will be beyond his reach," she corrected. "Together." The fisherman who transported them across the lake under cover of darkness was a free black man who had himself escaped slavery years before. As the Canadian shoreline came into view with the first light of dawn, he smiled at Bethany. "Welcome to freedom, sister," he said softly. "Real freedom." Stepping onto Canadian soil, Bethany felt something shift inside her, as if a weight she had carried so long she'd forgotten it was there suddenly lifted. She turned to Xavier, tears streaming down her face. "We made it," she whispered. "We really made it." Xavier gathered her in his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Yes, we did," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And it's just the beginning." They settled in a small community near Toronto, where other escaped slaves had established new lives. Xavier found work as a carpenter, using skills his father had taught him, while Bethany began assisting a local midwife, expanding her knowledge of healing. 6 months after crossing into Canada, on a crisp autumn morning, they stood before a small gathering of friends they had made in their new home. Xavier took Bethany's hands in his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke his vows. "Bethany Zimmerman, I promise to walk beside you, not ahead or behind, to respect your strength while offering mine, to build with you a life where both of us are truly free. I promise to love you until my last breath, and to cherish every moment we have together." Bethany blinked back tears as she responded, "Xavier Thompson, I choose you freely, with clear eyes and an open heart. I promise to face whatever comes alongside you, to build with you a home filled with love and laughter, to remind you always that you are worthy of happiness, and to love you completely and without reservation for all the days of my life." Their kiss sealed promises that had begun in danger but would flourish in freedom. The small crowd cheered as they turned to face them as husband and wife. Years passed, and their lives took root in Canadian soil. They built a comfortable home on the outskirts of the growing town, with room for the family they hoped to create. Xavier's carpentry business prospered, while Bethany established herself as a skilled midwife and healer. News from the United States reached them regularly, reports of increasing tensions between North and South, of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, and finally of the outbreak of civil war in 1861. "Do you ever think about going back?" Bethany asked one evening as they sat on their porch, reading the latest newspapers from across the border. Xavier considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "If slavery ends, as Lincoln promises, perhaps someday." 2 years later, when news of the Emancipation Proclamation reached them, They held each other and wept for those still fighting for freedom, for those who hadn't lived to see this day, for the long road still ahead. In the spring of 1864, their first child was born, a daughter they named Hope, for what had sustained them through their darkest days. As Xavier held his newborn daughter, his face alight with wonder and love, Bethany watched them with a heart so full it seemed it might overflow. "She's perfect," Xavier whispered, carefully tracing his finger along the baby's tiny cheek. "She is," Bethany agreed, reaching up to touch his face. "And she's free. Born free, will live free." Xavier leaned down to kiss his wife tenderly. Because her mother was brave enough to run toward freedom, and stubborn enough not to give up. Bethany smiled, remembering their journey, the terror, the pain, but also the moments of unexpected beauty and connection. And because her father was foolish enough to say to a group of armed men, "She's free, and she's mine to protect," Xavier laughed softly. "Not my most diplomatic moment, but the most important words anyone had ever spoken for me," Bethany replied, her eyes shining with love. "The first time someone stood between me and the world that wanted to own me. I would do it again," Xavier said seriously, "1,000 times over." As their daughter slept peacefully between them, secure in a freedom purchased at great cost, Bethany and Xavier Thompson looked toward a future bright with possibilities, a future they had risked everything to claim, and would spend their lives making worthy of that sacrifice. And when, years later, their children would ask for the story of how their parents met, Xavier would always begin the same way. "It was dawn, and the bravest woman I'd ever known was running for her life.